Hey everyone, this is Michael Peñate. Welcome to the Spending Time podcast. I'm joined today by Zach Piña, social media manager and contributor at aBlogtoWatch. How you doing, Zach?
Pretty good. How's it going, Michael?
Pretty good. Enjoying a nice summery day. Trying to get outside as much as I can, but it's good. How about you? It
is what it is. Yeah. No, we're deep in the middle of summer here in the Bay Area, and as Mark Twain famously said, he never knew a colder winter day than a summer in San Francisco, or something to that effect. And there's plenty of fog, and there's a little bit of sun kind of where I'm based, but I'm headed into the city in a few hours, and I know it's going to be winter jacket time. So it really doesn't warm up here until October, November. So
okay.
Everything's a little backwards, but
you do a lot of cycling too, right?
I ride a fair bit. I'm actually riding this evening, and it's funny because it's July 31st when we're recording this, and I'll go full base layer, arm warmers, jersey, vest, probably a hat.
After moving to Seattle, I really want to get into cycling, but I'm scared at how deep I can fall into the hobby because I know it isn't cheap.
No, it's not, but it is a rabbit hole just as much as I find. There's a weird balance of I could get a new watch, or I could get a new set of wheels. Which one is going to give me more enjoyment? Ultimately, you really can't in the smiles per dollar ratio. It's tough to beat getting out on a bike and rallying with your buddies. But I try to go kind of back and forth between the two worlds. But yeah, they're both expensive and both just stupid. So
yeah, right now the only thing I have access to is those bike share app bikes.
Oh yeah.
With the nerdy basket on the front, so maybe I'll upgrade soon.
Yeah. God, I was so surprised last time I was up in Seattle how many line bikes, right? How many of those bikes that were all over the place. Yeah. And when they came to the Bay Area, people resisted those so hard, throwing them into the bay, and they were getting dismantled and taken. I mean, has that been the line bike vandalism has unlocked a completely new level of creativity that you're seeing in people?
Yeah, we get the brake lines cut here.
So that's nasty.
But anyways,
that is nasty.
Speaking of fun summer activities, today we're gonna visit some topics that are pretty heavy in the watch world right now, and we're gonna try to balance that with some fun topics as well, namely watches that we wear during summer when we're active or just hanging out. And I think probably the best way to get this started is with a wrist check. So what watch are you wearing today, Zach?
Oh man, I've been wearing a Panerai. Actually, I never thought I would be a Panerai owner or a Panerai fan, but what I realized 6 or 8 months ago, I've been kind of a closeted fan, following the brand for a long time. I love the aesthetic, but hate the size. I've always hated the size.
Yeah.
And I think at SIHH in 2016, 2017, I can't remember if it was last year or the previous years. They introduced the new 9000 series movements going in a new 42 millimeter both Luminor and Radiomir case, and the 42 is amazing. I mean, it's still a proper sports watch, 100-meter water resistance. It's got a modern in-house manufacturing movement. The aesthetic is preserved. But the thickness is really, really nice. The thickness and the lug to lug are both super manageable, and I have a pretty small wrist. So I feel like this particular, I've got the 1523, which again, I've said this before, I'm kind of allergic to reference numbers. This one I know because I kind of agonized over it for a fair amount of time. But I would say that I've been wearing this watch the most out of pretty much everything this summer. It has a super long power reserve, so I'll set it down for the weekend and I'll pick it back up and it's still running. So it's all right, I'll just wear this again. Has a jumping hour hand.
Is that the 42?
Yeah, 42 millimeters. It's probably 12 millimeters thick. Wears really, really nice. And Panerai's done 12, or they've done 42 millimeter pieces in the past, older ones. But they're thick, they're super thick, and they wear really awkwardly, at least on my wrist, because they wear tall and short. This is just the proportions are really nicely dialed, and I've been really impressed with this particular set of Panerai, and I know they've certainly caught a fair share of I would say deserved amount of vitriol from sort of their dedicated fan base with the Douai collection. But I feel like this really straddles that line between, wearing like a traditionally, I mean, it's a lot of dial. It still feels like a Panerai. But it's a lot more wearable. And I feel like it doesn't betray the roots of what the watch set out to do. So I've been extremely happy with it. It looks amazing on pretty much any strap you put on it. 22 millimeter straps, so I didn't have to buy, a drawer full of new size straps too. So yeah, good stuff. What about you?
Yeah, I still really dig the 42 millimeter submersible.
Yeah, it's really good. Yeah, it's really good. And I kind of went back and forth between this and that, and ultimately, I have a few other divers, and also the wait list for. Apparently, there was a fairly lengthy wait list at Govberg for that one, so I ended up passing. Oh, wow. But yeah, that's a great piece.
Yeah, no, for me, it's a watch that came in not too long ago. It's not mine. It's in for review, but I've been wearing it a lot. And it's the Tudor Black Bay GMT that came out this year.
Ooh.
And I like it way more than I thought I would.
Why were you not expecting to like it? I'm curious.
I don't think this was really reported on during Basel, but there's actually a pretty deep bevel on the underside of the case. Mm-hmm. So when I heard Black Bay GMT, I just thought to myself, okay, it's going to be a really fat watch. I'm not really going to be into it. Mm-hmm. I'm not really sure how well a GMT would translate into the Black Bay lineup, but when they actually included this little bevel on the edges of the underside of the case, it actually visually cuts down on a lot of the heft of the watch.
Interesting.
So while the thickness isn't technically affected, it definitely feels like a slimmer watch.
Oh, that's funny.
And it's totally wearable, and if you ask me, I think the Rolex GMT is a little overhyped.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm digging this one a little bit more, and actually the two-tone Rolex GMT Master that came out, but that's another story.
Different story, yeah. No, that's interesting to hear about the Black Bay GMT. I've long not been a fan of the Black Bay. I actually have a Pelagos, and I always found the Black Bay to wear just like long, like it wears too rectangular. But I remember when I put the GMT on at Basel, I definitely felt different. It felt like it wore a lot better, and I didn't put two and two together or articulate the fact that there was that bevel on the underside. So I'll have to take a second look at it when it comes around. I'd be curious to check out your review though. Make sure you get some photos of the undersides.
Yeah,
definitely want to see that.
Make sure I emphasize that. Also, another thing about this watch, I just feel that with the aluminum Pepsi bezel, you get such a more appropriate variety of color tones. Depending on the light, it almost looks like a Lake Placid blue or a deep aquamarine. You sometimes get closer to the faded look of an older GMT Master.
Yep.
And sometimes the Serichrome bezels on the new GMT Masters, they can be a little bit flashy. So the muted tones of the aluminum bezel, that's something I really appreciate. But yeah, it's a well-sized watch. It's 41 millimeters. It has the manufacturer MT 5652, and I never really appreciated power reserve until messing with this watch, because this one has the 70-hour power reserve.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I forgot. I wound it up when I first got it, and I wore it for a bit, put it away for a few days, and came back to it, and I was like, this thing is still running. That's wild. So I guess
it's kind of amazing what that does to your wear habits and to your collection when you can rotate a watch every 2 or 3 days and come back and it's still running, still keeping chronometric, still keeping COSC standards or whatever. And that's amazing.
Yeah, that's what I did. I opened the box thinking I was going to grab another watch. Okay, I'm going to wind it, set it. But then I saw this Black Bay still running, and I thought, okay, I'm just going to wear this now.
There's something to be said for convenience. I know the Panerais kind of had that same effect in the collection where, why wouldn't you wear it? It's running. It looks great. I'll just switch the strap real quick. I mean, it's the interaction with your watch on a daily basis or a semi-daily. I try to rotate every 3 or 4 days. But again, like if you're rotating every 3 or 4 days and it's still running when you come back to it, that rotation, I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Have you had a chance to to travel with it at all? I mean, it is a true, it's funny, there's two types of GMT watches, and I feel like this gets glossed over. As Bilal can attest to, I'm GMT obsessed. I think it's the most useful complication out there. But there are two types of GMTs. There's the desk phone GMT, essentially, where you're doing business with people on the other side of the world, and you need to know what time it is in Sri Lanka or Indonesia or whatever. And then there's the actual a traveler's GMT, where you're moving around the country, you're moving around the world, you land in a new location, you need to be able to set the watch quickly. And to me, that those types of watches are much rarer. The Tudor, of course, being one of them. But I feel like they get lumped together really easily because just any GMT watch, because it shows another time zone, people are like, oh, it's perfect for traveling. It's actually a pain in the ass for traveling if you can't adjust the hour hands quickly. So have you had a chance to kind of put that to use?
I haven't had the chance to travel with it just yet, but this does have the Flyers GMT, I think they call it, where the primary hour hand is the one that can be independently set. I think other Solida based GMT movements don't. It's the GMT hand.
Correct.
I have a Glycine Airman that behaves that way.
Yep.
But no, not yet. I hope to soon. But this would be the perfect traveler's GMT watch, I think. In addition to something like the Explorer 2, or kind of a regular GMT Master. It's also great. It's so satisfying to just run that hour hand and watch the date switch.
Yeah.
Pretty damn cool, if you ask me.
Yeah, that's a super useful complication. Yeah, all the ETA and Solida based movements, it's slave to the 24-hour hand, so it's essentially reverse of what you just described. Where the 24-hour hand is the quick set. It's not super useful. I know that who is it? There's I'm spacing on the names now. Oh, Eterna has a GMT module that has that same behavior. So to my knowledge, Eterna, Rolex, Omega, all of Omega's GMT movements have the same behavior, and Tudor as well.
I would almost argue though that I kind of, while this GMT is really cool, I kind of still like the 12-hour bezel that you could just rotate without undoing a crown. And actually, I have an Oris Pro Pilot World Timer, the one that you can switch. You can move the hour hand independently by twisting the bezel. So that's another pretty cool.
That's a super cool piece. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a wild watch.
That's kind of cheating. Yeah.
Yeah. But,
I feel like Ariel just reviewed that interesting traveler's watch. We should have posted a video or something on Instagram about that. But that Terra Cielo Marley watch, the TCM.
Oh, that had
kind
two time zones?
Well, it didn't have two time zones, but it does have a really interesting means of setting the hands, where you take the watch off, you disengage this locking mechanism on the underside, and then you rotate the bezel, and the bezel actually sets both the hour and the minute hands, and so you can just whip the whole thing around. It doesn't quick set it as it does with like a. It's kind of what we're talking about with the Tudor, but it is super cool and very satisfying to pop it off and adjust that in hourly or 30-minute increments or whatever. So there are other options out there, but that's I used to have a Glycine Airman as well, and that was kind of my first foray into GMT watches. But I do tend to move around a bit for work and with a aBlogtoWatch from time to time as well, and I've always just found it super handy to be able to. Pop it out when you land at a new airport, click, pop it back in.
Yeah, definitely a nice feature. The only thing I would change on this Tudor is I really love it if the bracelet tapered a little bit more. But that's a very small issue. It's still a really nice bracelet and super comfy, especially during the warmer months. So speaking of summer watches, what else? What else do you kind of recommend? I don't know how many picks you have. I just have one other watch that has been competing with this Tudor still.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I think we're both fans of this one. It was released last year. It's the Doxa Sub 300.
Aha, yes.
Professional Black Lung edition.
That's an extremely cool piece. It's funny that you say that too, because I was, we were going through the paces for this, aBlogtoWatch editors pick our top three-handed sports watches for summer, essentially. And I was kind of going down the list of, is it a Grail? Is it something I'm wearing a ton? Is it, so essentially the two watches I've worn the most this summer, the Panerai, which is on my wrist right now, and also I've got a Doxa Sub 750T, which I bought actually off of eBay a few months ago, but completely NOS. It's a watch from 2011, I think. Still had stickers, everything fully intact. It was just like lying around in some dude's shop. And it's a pretty unbeatable summer piece. I mean, and you've got the orange one though, correct? You've got the professional.
Yeah, the 750T, is that also the GMT version?
It's not. They did a 750 GMT as well.
Okay.
But the 750 is more of like it's a I would call it Doxa's kind of Pelagos essentially, or Black Bay. It's a slightly larger case. It's like a 44 millimeter case, slightly wider dial. It's relatively thin, but I mean it feels fully modern. Whereas what you've got is like the Black Bay 58 of Doxa essentially.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And it was impressive to realize how slim the watch actually wears when you finally get your hands on it.
Yeah.
I took this watch to Colombia this year, and it was just I brought this watch and maybe 3 other watches thinking that I was gonna get a ton of travel time out of them, but this is the watch that stayed on my wrist for most of the time. There's something really fun about being in the water with that watch, chasing taxis with the watch on, bumping it around.
Yeah, I love that.
Just a very, very cool watch.
Classic Clive Cussler style, true to the OG.
Maybe a little more touristy than Clive, but
that's super cool. Yeah, it's Ariel has kind of waxed poetic about this before, but there is something really satisfying about putting a piece through sort of the way a watch designer sits down and I always think it's funny too, because even as we're talking about travelers' watches and the preference between the behavior of the GMT hand or divers' watches and the preference behind the color or the feature set or whatever, everybody's use case is generally fairly different. So it's always interesting to see how all of these different use cases mesh together under the vision of kind of what the designer intended that product to be used as, whether it's a dive watch or a pilot watch. And so there's something really satisfying about getting this bright orange watch into the surf, or like some dusty street in the middle of nowhere, or whatever. So yeah, cool adventure watches. Kind of on the flip side though of more attainable adventure watches. What was your pick for the if a Grail? I kind of cringe at the term Grail, but if money was no object, what was your pick there?
Oh man, so yeah, we published an article this past Sunday, and it was an editor's list of our favorite 3-hand sports watches. The term Grail was tossed around quite a bit, but I think we avoided it for the most part. But my pick was a little less attainable, and it's one of those things where it really is love at first sight, and you can't really explain it. But it was the 15400 ST black dial Royal Oak. Just plain, time only, stainless steel, date at 3:00. Never in my life would I have expected to find myself attracted to a Royal Oak. But as I wrote in the article, I had some time to kill in Vegas. I think it was last year, and they have a boutique over there. And I was just blown away by the watch. Just everything from the bracelet, especially the bracelet. I can't even fathom how they produce that. Every link individually tapering and chamfered and polished and brushed. It blows my mind. And I think as luxurified as the Royal Oak has become, I think it's still almost humble. Mm-hmm. Especially in AP's current catalog. Mm-hmm. I think I could do far worse. It's funny. It's funny that you say that, because it is one of those rare watches that looks
and feels every bit like a true like luxury product. It feels like a 5-figure watch. And it's funny with all the hype around the Nautilus and the with all of Patek's kind of luxury sport pieces going off the chain right now. I don't know if it's becoming a victim of its own hype, but like you put one of those on and there is a little bit of like, wait, that's it? Like this goes for 50 grand on the pre-owned market. That's it. Mm-hmm. Whereas when you do put on a Royal Oak, especially some of their modern variants where they've really dialed in the finishing and like you said, the bracelet and everything, nothing fits like one of those bracelets. And it feels like something really, really special. I've never tried one on and had a that's it moment with an AP. And I mean, I say what you will about sort of their aesthetic and the design language, which I feel like is a totally different topic of conversation. I think they look and are the part, I would argue.
Yeah, it's almost like the Seiko Monster. I feel like I feel like the AP is the Seiko Monster of the high-end luxury watch market, because you get into the watches and you start looking for affordable stuff and you're gonna land on the Seiko Monster and just think to yourself, wow, that thing is hideous. And most people have the same reaction to the Royal Oak. Yep. But you really have to sometimes just get it. And trying it on in person is a big part of the equation a lot of times. And yeah, that thing is becoming pretty scarce, just like every other stainless steel model from a lot of the brands right now. Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's a bummer it's a bummer that's happening. I guess again, it's another podcast topic entirely. I've thankfully managed to avoid the Royal Oak entirely because it is a sports watch, but it's only water resistant to 50 meters. And I know there is the Royal Oak Offshore, which doubles that or triples it, I think. But yeah, I in the back of my mind, I have to, everything in my collection has to start at 100 meters at least. Right. So anyway, I've managed to avoid that. My pick was kind of along those lines. It was funny. I went back and forth between a few picks, and I ended up sending. I just sent 2 over to Bilal, and I just said, pick the one that you think works the best with the story. And so he ended up. I love world timers. I love watches that travel well, and it's killing me that Omega has this incredible world timer that's only available in platinum. Has this enamel dial. I honestly don't love the aesthetic of it. I love the fact that they've built a world timer into the Aquaterra platform, which is it's a beautiful case. It wears really, really well. I think the Aquaterra is kind of this, as we're talking about luxury sport watches, it is, I would argue, one of the best options that you could get for under 5K. I mean, I think on Strap they're 45 or they're just under 5K. Amazing watches with the new Meta certified movements. They wear really, really well on a wide variety of straps. So anyway, everything that the Aquaterra has done, I would say, in the last 2 years has been really exciting. Not just for stainless steel luxury sport watches, but it's cool to see them kind of pushing the envelope forward with bringing a world timer here. Now the downside, of course, is that it's $50,000 and it's like total halo product. But I am kind of hoping, as Omega has done in the past, is where they kind of, with new technologies and new dial treatments and such, they often introduce halo products, 1 to 2 product cycle years out from kind of bringing it to the rest of the masses. So I am kind of hoping that this I'm preemptively picking this now in hopes that it'll be out in steel and maybe a slightly more pared down dial, maybe next year for Basel or something. So fingers crossed for that. I did also send Bilal the Vacheron Constantine, their world timer as well, the overseas world timer.
That's right.
Super cool piece. I cheated a little bit, because the goal was 3-handed sport watches. Well, I mean, it's had 3 hands. It's got some other stuff in there, but it is 3 hands. But that's another just incredibly beautiful piece. It's funny, it's about the same price as the Omega, oddly enough.
Omega was really out of I think you had the most out of the box selection for this this list we came up with, but it looks killer. You said there's something you're not really too much of a fan of on the dial. What is it just the
Yeah,
The coloring?
I don't love. You know, it looks like a kid painted it. I'll be blunt. It just doesn't look very good. Yeah, I mean, I know that it's enamel. I know it's done by hand. I know it's there's absolutely art and craft behind that. But I do like it when there's a little bit more of. I mean, if you look at the VC. It's kind of a relief, and it's done in a gradient as well. So part of the world is dark. It's like a darker gradient. This like darker silver brushed gradient. It's really beautiful how they executed it. It doesn't quite look like a map that was drawn, essentially.
Oh yeah, this thing is cool.
Yeah, that's a kick-ass watch. And also, I don't believe, because I've never seen this one in motion, but the globe motif in the center of the VC actually rotates as well. It's part of that disc, so it rotates. Every 24 hours. I think the Omega does it as well, although just something about the world on there just looks a little bit off to me. There's too many kind of textures and things going on here, but I would absolutely buy that if it was in stainless steel, even if they did the dial one for one the same.
This VC is a little more subtle, I think, in the way the globe was done.
Yeah, I agree.
Almost a little more casual, less artsy, I suppose.
Less artsy, but it's arguably more complicated to make. So it's interesting how you can kind of you can be more subtle about it and have it come out, with a higher level of complexity. But I last summer, my wife and I did kind of an extended trip to Indonesia for 3 weeks. And that was the only watch that I brought. I had at the time the Aquaterra GMT. It was their Good Planet. And that was the previous generation of the Aquaterra. So the case was designed a little bit different. It just didn't fit me very well. But to this day, that is probably my favorite watch that I've ever owned and sold. Unfortunately, I just couldn't get it to sit right. The newer cases, where the straps attach and the curvature of the lugs are a little bit different, so that same case size would arguably fit better, hopefully. So I'm kind of holding out hope that they bring it back correctly. But it was a really easy watch to wear. I was able to dive with it, swim with it. It's kind of lower key than like a Rolex Explorer 2, which arguably is probably the closest comparison. It's nice to have a GMT. Asia and Indonesia, the time zone difference between here and California is kind of wonky, or between there and California is kind of wonky, as I'm sure you know. So, but yeah, I don't know. Fingers crossed. But that was my pick for the list.
Very cool. Well, I think maybe it's a good time to switch gears and talk about the kind of the big news that swept the watch world this weekend. I believe it was Sunday. In a Swiss newspaper, NZZ.
Oh boy.
Yeah, some big news. If you haven't seen the article on aBlogtoWatch, be sure to check it out. But the gist of it is that the Swatch group is pulling out of Baselworld effective 2019. So that was, I don't know about you, but I found it pretty unexpected.
Definitely.
And it's certainly significant news. I'm just still, I don't want to say it's a state of shock. I'm just trying to figure out what Baselworld 2019 is going to look like without, brands like Omega there.
Yeah.
But I am excited about people like Nick Hayek publicly calling for change and reform, especially in the world of trade shows and the way the watch industry does business in general, because I think it's very easy for people up top to become very complacent with the way things are being run. And a trade show like Basel could just go on autopilot for years and years without any real improvements to accommodations or, the value that they offer for the exhibitors.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
What was kind of your initial reaction?
Yeah, I mean, not to sound like a complete echo chamber, but yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think the one kind of key word that I'd focused in on here, and actually you just mentioned it, was complacency. I mean, you see a lot of that in the Swiss watch industry as a whole, and I wouldn't say complacency, but like there is a strong, compelling argument for tradition. I mean, the traditions are what I would, argue keep a lot of the products that we know and love coming back and keeps them exciting. And a lot of the products that we love them now because they adhered to a strict tradition from, a long time ago. And the romance of that is what is a strong underpinning within the industry. Now the counterbalance to that, though, and this is why I've always, really loved Omega as a brand, is that they've maintained that history and they've maintained those traditions, but they haven't been afraid to rock the boat and continually throw things at the wall to see what sticks. And I think if Hayek is saying, if you guys aren't going to be the arbiters of change, we are. I really like the fact that they're taking the reins and they're kind of putting their money where their mouths are. And I think they wouldn't pull out of it unless they had a pretty strong plan to do something themselves that was either better, more exciting, or more approachable for not just industry folks, but for the consumer as well. So I don't know. I think it did definitely come as a surprise, and I think the back and forth between, like, he said, she said was pretty interesting, because Swatch was there's essentially three groups at Basel. It's Swatch, it's Rolex, and it's Patek, and you lose one of your three biggest cash cows. I mean, that's, who else does that account for? I mean, so we would no longer see watches from Omega, Longines, who had an amazing showing last year. I mean, it's a laundry list of brands that are. Yeah,
I think people are gonna quickly realize how much the way they consume Basel content has been affected.
Right.
Because if you take a brand like Longines, Rado is in there, Hamilton, Tissot. A lot of those brands are companies that pull you out of the insanity of Basel, and bring you back down to earth and get you excited about products that you can pick up for yourself.
Yeah.
Longines had the Avigation Big Eye. Hamilton had that crazy Panda chrono 1 year. Tissot had another chrono. Rado had the Captain Cook. Those are, I feel like those are really fun watches for people like the two of us to get into.
Certina had some super cool stuff at the show as well. There was no small shortage of brands at the show that had exciting offerings. And let's be honest, when you look at covering the task of, this is great news for me, because covering the show is a really daunting task. And it's not so much that covering the show, there's, with all the time in the world, stuff would still get missed, but there are legitimately great watches that we simply cannot cover because the expectations of covering certain brands or certain product launches or certain whatever, and you don't have enough time to, some of the really interesting stuff that falls through the cracks at Basel doesn't really get reported on until May, June, July. That stuff is still kind of creeping out even now. And it would be really cool if things were parsed out a little bit, such that we could actually spend enough time in Omega's booth to be able to see. It wasn't this year. I think it was 2 years ago. They launched over 150 SKUs. I want to say it was over 150. Okay, that number is a little bit ridiculous. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. However, there were some amazing pieces in there. And that World Timer was actually one of them. And that to me at the time was a pretty compelling story. It was Omega's first World Timer. It was this, and this. It was a harbinger for a lot of other things that were going on at the time, but nobody covered it until probably April or May. And I think the greater thing that could happen here is, with a smaller show, you can get more time, higher quality time spent with more interesting releases across the board. It could be a win for consumers. I agree. That you're looking at, the industry and consumers in general changing the way we not just produce but consume news and stories. And I think the potential loser here is also in a way the consumer, because it is really exciting. The auto industry is often compared to the watch industry in this capacity, but how it is exciting for fans to sit on the sidelines and wait for the veil to be lifted on these new products. And there are very few industries that still, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, here's the new thing, and I would hate to see that go away. because it feels a little bit like Christmas, you know, in the end of March when you wake up one morning and there's an overload of news and all this new stuff that there is to see.
Yeah, the trade shows, I've been reading that trade shows in general have been downsizing.
Hugely, yeah.
Whether it's cars or, you know, even if we were talking about bands and music in the pre-talk, you know, there's the summer and winter NAMM shows for music gear and audio equipment and all that stuff. So all of those shows have been cut down significantly. But I'm really interested to see what brands do on their own. So I don't know. I think it was a couple of years ago, Bremont kind of said goodbye to Basel also.
Good point,
they started doing their townhouse events, which I found to be more exciting.
No, absolutely.
Almost more efficient. They can do their own thing. I've never owned a Bremont, but I would love to see more events like that take place.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You know, and I think that boils down to what are trade shows for? We talked a little bit about the bike industry. I came from the bike industry prior to spending more time with watches, and that all the trade shows in the bike industry are also in really rapid decline. But the trade shows, there's one show that takes place in Panerai once a year in April, and that's the only trade show in the bike industry that's actually increased in attendance. It's either maintained or increased in attendance. It's because it's consumer facing, and it's more of a festival and a celebration rather than a release platform, because brands don't go to it to release new products anymore because they can do that over the web. And I think when you look at what a brand is actually using the trade show for, is it a news platform? Is it a way to connect to your buyers? Is it a way to connect to your end consumers? Brands need to figure out what that's for. And I think the old model of what Basel being as a news platform is fully outdated. And to your point, Bremont has used the townhouses because they open the townhouses, they have a media day, and then it's open to the public. And I think it's an amazing way to bring people through. I mean, that's always been kind of one of Bremont's calling cards, is their customer interactions are warm. Nick and Giles are super approachable. I mean, everybody that I've met at that brand, and I've owned a Bremont before, and the ownership experience was really, it felt like a neat thing. It felt like you were part of something. And I think that's the key to survivability here is and not just for the trade shows, but a big aspect for the industry as well is those consumer interactions. I just think you can't underscore how important those are. And I think there are still cool ways to make it feel like Christmas morning, you know, for people holding releases and doing, you know, if Swatch were to do its own show like SIHH, I mean, we still get all the SIHH goodies in January or February. So it does feel like we kind of have two things to cover. But I couldn't imagine having all the Richemont brands at Basel and having to cover JLC and,
oh gosh,
I mean, could you imagine throwing in all that stuff into the Basel chaos? I mean, Basel day one this year, I think we published around 30 articles on press day alone. I believe it.
So that would be pretty wild.
Yeah, I just couldn't imagine.
Yeah, I think the digital age is also something to take into consideration. And I think Nick Hayek's words were along the lines of, it just doesn't make sense today to do these trade shows. He mentioned that they have a strong connection with their consumers, they have a strong connection with their retailers, and that right now they want to explore more creative opportunities with upcoming partners. So we were also, and people have been speculating about this for years, whatever Omega will do in 2019 for the 50th anniversary of the Apollo moon landings, they're going to have to leverage it in some way. Right. I don't think it's unreasonable for me to assume that. But I always pictured it at Baselworld. Kind of looking forward to see what happens now.
We're looking for an Omega branded rocket on Cape Canaveral next July.
That would be pretty sweet.
Oh geez.
Actually, I think a pretty cool event at the Smithsonian would be kind of awesome. But
what was it, 2 years ago or a year ago, where they did? I don't know if you were there. I just followed it through the periphery, but it was in. I should have done a little homework on this prior to the conversation, but Omega did some big event in Texas with all the astronauts and George Clooney and all the Speedmaster fans. And what anniversary was that for? I want to say it was like 2 or 3 years ago. Anyway, they kind of did that, and that seemed like a really neat thing. But yeah, I've heard. Even at the Omega, the Omega meeting that we had at Basel this year, the gentleman that walked us through the collection, he was on both hands. He was counting off all the different anniversaries and things that Omega kind of had percolating for 2019. So it doesn't surprise me that, given all the, their love for limited editions and anniversaries and such, and two, them pulling out of the show, it could be them just doubling down on like a really aggressive, exciting like release year. Because it seemed, this year there were some big, like the Seamaster 300 was big-ish. There have been some interesting speedies, but there wasn't anything huge this year, and it could be they're just kind of holding their cards for next year.
Those new Seamasters were enough for me.
Yeah, they were enough for me as well. Yeah.
I think another question that people kind of tiptoe around is, will the show be okay? Will Baselworld survive? I saw a lot of, rest in peace Baselworld talk going around. I really don't think it's that extreme. I think the show is going to go on. But if LVMH changes their mind, that's a different story. But right now I'm just kind of curious to see how the show feels next year. It's still going to be really sad to not get news from, Longines, Rado. Or whatever. But, for now, I don't think there's going to be much change. I think the show's still probably going to go on autopilot.
I agree. And I mean, look, like a lot of the people that went to the show looked at LVMH brands, they looked at Rolex, they looked at Patek, they looked at all the other brands that were there in addition to the Swatch brands. Attendance, I'm sure, is gonna fall based on like retailer meetings and stuff. Like a lot of the actual brand partners will be reduced, but I don't know. I thought it was funny because the overarching theme that you heard from everybody this year was that Basel was really small and the hallways were empty, and that they'd constricted everything, and to try to make it feel like there was more activity. It was my first Basel. I've been to a lot of other trade shows that have also been in decline, and with smaller numbers. But it felt pretty busy. There was still, on day one, the news day, there was still like a big crowd outside the door. There was a stampede to Rolex. There was chaos for the first like 2 hours. It seemed, in the general scheme of trade shows that I've attended, some in Vegas, some in, other parts of the country, it felt large. I know that's only in comparison to yesteryear when it was absolutely just like gobsmackingly massive, which is not anymore. But to your point, I don't think it's going anywhere either. And I think Omega's going to find ways to deliver news and in a meaningful way next year. I don't think they would pull out without a pretty strong plan in place already. So I'm eager to see how that shakes out, quite frankly.
Yeah, of course. I think during the duration of the show, it was still around 100,000 people. When all was said and done.
And that's not a small number, because the town of Basel is like, it's like Toledo, Ohio. This is like the Toledo, no offense to our listeners in Ohio. I went to school in Northwestern Ohio, so I feel like I can speak to this, but it is. It felt very much like a Midwestern European town. I don't know how else to describe it.
It's a big cultural event for them too.
It is. It really is. But like the taxi drivers, it's crazy how expensive things get when the show comes to town. And like the locals like the show, but the locals also kind of hate the show because like their favorite restaurants basically for 2 weeks are like doubled in size. They're doubled in price for no reason whatsoever. Like all the hotels, the cost of the hotels go crazy through the roof. And so there was talk of, the new management behind Basel. They were working on, like catering packages and hotel packages and making things more affordable for smaller brands, but also for people to be able to go and enjoy the show and not have to stay 4 towns away or, For it to not be so prohibitively expensive. Because I think, when a show's impact is negated, when a show's economical impact is negated at the local level because it's so prohibitively expensive for even locals to participate in or reap the benefits of, I think that's also a much bigger problem. And for a smaller kind of old European city, for that to take place in it was actually, I really felt bad there were 2 or 3 different taxi drivers that I had that were like not down with it. Not at all. And I felt bad about that, because you'd think that you go to Vegas and those guys are psyched when like the Jewelers Conference comes to town, and they're psyched when JCK is around, because there's high rollers and there's lots of business, and business is good. Nothing else changes, so
yeah, accommodations are a huge kind of issue, and that's one that really upsets me, just from the stories I hear from you guys that have been to the show. Something needs to change there to accommodate press, brands.
Yeah,
I mean,
I couldn't agree more.
And just the cost of those exhibitor spaces.
Yeah.
It's like it's
astronomical.
I can't even believe what some brands spend there. So
we'll
see how Basel reacts.
Yeah. No, that has to happen. I mean, especially it's created an environment where people can do it just because they can. I mean, my Airbnb didn't even have Wi-Fi, but it was clearly like a business Airbnb, like for the show, because they were talking about like, oh, it's this walking distance to the show or whatever. No Wi-Fi, so I was like hotspotted my phone for 4 or 5 days or whatever. And it was just like, you can't do that just because you can. I mean, the show has created this like toxic environment that like it was so bizarre to me that it was so unhospitable for us to go there and like be good at our jobs.
Yeah, hotspotting your phone. Jeez.
Yeah, it was
fry an egg on that thing.
Yeah, something like that. So yeah, change is coming. Hopefully, I'm for it. So
cool. Well, this is obviously a pretty big topic that's going to continue to evolve. We've covered it on aBlogtoWatch, just on the surface, but I'm sure we're going to continue to report on it as the story changes, as we get updates, as we talk to people in the industry. So definitely stay tuned for that. But overall, I think this was a fun episode. We talked about some cool summer watches we've been wearing, some recommendations for watches to wear when you're having a good time this year, and some watches that we're kind of drooling over in the, I guess, grail category.
Yeah, absolutely.
We also kept things serious for a bit.
Yeah, no, I know. It's tough to make that transition from a semi, like, the death of the industry conversation to kind of looking ahead. But I do, I mean, we were worried about that a little bit, but I do genuinely feel like, in an industry where everything arguably happens 20 years too late. I mean, that's kind of why we love this industry, is because nothing changes, but at the same time, like, there are degrees of change that are not just acceptable, but they are like absolutely required to be able to move things forward. So, I think it's exciting. I think there are a lot of people that are really worried about it, but and maybe that's just because I haven't been in it, quite entrenched in it for quite as long, but I think there's a lot to be excited about. One thing I would love to say too, though, is just that if this podcast has been a good listen for you, if it's been a good part of your commute or wherever you consume your podcast, definitely leave a review for us on iTunes. That's super helpful. Comment if you're watching or listening on YouTube. Where else are we hosting this?
Everywhere.
SoundCloud is on SoundCloud,
where you can enjoy your podcast.
That's good stuff. Well, Michael, this has been a lot of fun. I appreciate you taking the time and inviting me on the show this time. So I'm going to get back to doing all the Instagrams.
Yeah, likewise, Zach. Thanks for your time, and thank you everyone for listening. This has been the Spending Time podcast. My name is Mike. Thanks for listening.
Cheers, everybody.